All right, I call this treaty, the line is gone. So even though Congress is executing treaties that are guaranteeing that there's no one's going to go on to the properties of the tribes as they exist, by 1783, public lands were virtually the only asset available to the new government for purposes of raising revenue. In lieu of cash bonuses for veterans of war, for veterans of the War of Independence, the new government gave them land. Now, this is because the American War basically cost the new nation roughly around 165 million pounds in 1783 values, which is about $21.6 billion. Translation, the colonies did not have any way to pay for it. The reason being is because in the Articles of Confederation, they did not provide any method of raising funds other than voluntarily. So the French War cost over 1.3 billion livres in the loans to the United States. And this becomes important because that 3.3, once it's added to the 3.3 billion they owed for the French and Indian War, it leads to economic chaos, which will end up with causing the French Revolution. The British, it cost them 250 million pounds, and they had to add that on to their $135 million that they had spent to pay for the French and Indian War. So the cost of the Revolutionary War, the second battle, if you will, of the French and Indian War, ends up costing quite a bit to Great Britain. And so it's with that you need to understand that adding that 250 million pounds on top of an already existing 135 million is why the king was insisting on having the colonies be taxed to pay for that war debt. Spain, apparently it only cost them about 700 million reals. Long story short, in 1785, so now we're 2 years past the signing of Treaty of Paris, the Ordinance of 1785, and the new government is able to raise considerable money by surveying and selling lands in Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee to land companies and land speculators. So already you're going to start seeing the influx of settlers into those areas. Well, in 1785 as well, the very first cession of land is made by the Cherokee in what is now Tennessee. And the area that they secede is, by the way, where Fort Nashboro was, which is Nashville. 1787, the Northwest Ordinance begins the land cessions for the tribes that are from what as I like to call them, the Great Rebel Alliance. 1788, Kentucky lands are ceded by the Iroquois, but they're Shawnee lands. So now you're starting to see the United States do some sneaky stuff, and this is some of those earlier treaties. I don't know how it's sneaky. So the Great Rebel Alliance starts getting upset, and so by 1790, the Shawnee under Blue Jacket and the Miami under Little Turtle defeat General Hamar, who is coming into that area, that territory, to basically move the Indians. Again, in 1791, Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, with 14 allied tribes, the Great Rebel Alliance that Pontiac had founded, defeats General St. Clair. As a result of this, it's one of the greatest defeats in the United States history, because 623 United States soldiers are killed in this battle. Little Bighorn, for example, 211 soldiers were killed. So it's quite a stand that the Rebel Alliance is taking. As a result, as you'll notice that I have the French Revolution happens at the same time in 1793. King Louis is going to be guillotined, chop off his head, because of the French Revolution. As mentioned, the cost, France rolled the dice because they had quite a large deficit from the French and Indian War, and then when they re-entered and gave significant loans to the United States, it basically put them into a form of bankruptcy. The Great Alliance in 1794 will be defeated at Fallen Timbers. The reason being is because Britain, because of the Jay Treaty, could not provide guns and ammo any longer to the tribes. So the tribes were literally outnumbered and outgunned. And so at the Treaty of Greenville, they're going to surrender millions of acres. 1795, the Yazoo land fraud. Already the land that belongs to the Creeks, Cherokees, Chickasaws, and Choctaws, there's companies that are starting to do land speculation, like they're going to own the property. In other words, they're foreshadowing the removal of those tribes. 1801, Napoleon invades Spain. Louisiana, as a result, the Louisiana Territory returns to France. But in 1803, Napoleon needs funds for making war and sells Louisiana Purchase to President Jefferson. In 1805, Lewis and Clark begin their exploration, Corps of Discovery. And then in 1806, Tecumseh, among the Shawnee, emerges as the new leader of the Shawnee. When I call it the Great Rebel Alliance, it's because this is the original alliance that was created by Ottawa Chief Pontiac. So if we think of the Ottawa Chief Pontiac like Obi-Wan Kenobi, that means Little Turtle and Blue Jacket are kind of like Skywalkers, which means that now we even have a new generation of the rebellion, and so Tecumseh is starting to rise in ascendancy. In 1809, William Henry Harrison will sign what's known as the Whiskey Treaty. He gets 3 million acres in Ohio and Indiana, signed by treaty chiefs. Now Tecumseh's upset and confronts him. He says he asks how he gotten 11 debt-ridden, whiskey-soaked treaty chiefs to sign agreements for land they did not own. The reason being is because apparently some Potawatomi chiefs, who may not have been chiefs, had signed away land that belonged to the Shawnee. So what you're saying is the Shawnee and that rebel alliance are going to start having some serious concerns with the new nation. So in 1811, Tecumseh will seek an alliance with the powerful southern tribes. Only the Upper Creeks will enter into the alliance. William Henry Harrison, knowing that he's gone on this recruiting message, invades Tippecanoe with a surprise attack against the Indian Confederacy. As you can see, millions of acres by this time have been ceded by the 5 tribes, so he is making an attempt to swing their alliance. 1813, the Red Sticks attack Fort Mims and the Creek War begins. In addition, at Fort Thames in the north, Tecumseh falls. He is killed in battle. They never find his body, so it's kind of one of those cool things. Maybe there's a myth there. Long story short, by 1814, the Cherokee, Lower Creeks, and Chickasaw join General Jackson and the 2,500 Tennessee volunteers in the battle, what will become the final battle for the Upper Creeks, the Red Sticks, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Now, the reason this is significant is because the Upper Creeks had about 1,000 warriors. But that means ultimately, at the end of the War of 1812, at least 1/3 of the volunteer force for Andrew Jackson was tribal. So the Muskogee, as a result, will lose millions of acres. In the Creek War, which was written by H.S. Halbert in 1895, he does document that Mr. Warren Wilbanks of Noxubee County, Mississippi, mentions that the Tennessee soldiers cut long strips of skin from the bodies of the dead Creeks so they could make bridle reins from that. Some significant weird trophy stuff going on. November 1814, 795 Choctaws join Pushmataha, and they basically go to Pensacola again, where Choctaw have been before several times. And it says they mopped up the Red Stick warriors in the swamps, but they also were preparing to fight against the British and the Spanish. But by January 15, even after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, the Battle of New Orleans takes place. Again, some Choctaws accompany, about 60 accompany, Andrew Jackson at the battle that makes him famous. By 1817, the Seminole Wars began. As a result, Osceola will see in 1823 millions of acres lost, and the Seminoles only retain the central part, which is where a lot of swampland is. But by 1832, after the Third Seminole War, their war chief Billy Bowlegs will have to surrender, and the remaining land, that including the swampland, is surrendered by the Seminole. In 1823, ironically as well, the Oneida, if you remember them, who fought for the United States during the Revolutionary War, are forcibly removed to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Apparently, serving the United States is not going to help preserve your tribe. 1824, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is created by John C. Calhoun. Now, if you remember, John C. Calhoun's grandmother was killed during the Cherokee-Anglo War, which was another one of those wars of incursions.